I'm going to begin the session by acknowledging Aboriginal people as the first peoples and traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters on which we are all working, wherever you are, across both the state but also the country. Thanks for joining us from New South Wales, Maree. I want to acknowledge that these lands have never been ceded, and that we have a deep respect to pay to Aboriginal communities for the strength of culture, and recognise the wealth of experience that Aboriginal communities hold in partnering with clients and communities, and our ongoing commitment as an organisation and as a sector to promoting self-determination. I also want to acknowledge the women and children who have been murdered, and those who are living today with family violence, and all of those who are working to end violence and support our communities in this incredibly challenging time. So, and thank and acknowledge all of you. This is an event we're putting on specifically as part of our partnership with Family Safety Victoria around the Family Violence Leadership Network and that we've been running. This is the first time we've run it as an online event like this. So thanks for all joining us. And as I said, we're recording it and we'll be making it available in one of our upcoming newsletters. So just a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce Sandie and Maree and we kick off with the conversation. We're going to be using the chat function so that you can put comments in there whenever you want. We've got a couple of people who'll be keeping an eye on that and shooting them through to me. This is Sandie and Maree both know each other very well, and I know them. And so we want to keep this as live and energetic a conversation as possible. So we'll be weaving in your questions as we go. I'm not going to wait till the end for that. If you can please keep yourself muted, videos off. I know sometimes they kind of randomly do strange things. And I'll have some other things to announce at the end. So let me now introduce and welcome both Sandie and Maree. I'll start with Sandie. Sandie has spent her professional life working with, advocating for vulnerable children, young people, women and families. Sandie, I have known for a very long time. She was the CEO at Berry Street for 26 years and saw some incredible transformation across that time and grew the organisation. It said significantly, Sandie, on your bio, but I don't think significantly does justice to the transformation of the merger that you oversaw and the organisation that you left in incredibly good shape. Throughout a lot of that time, you've been the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Children's Council since 2007. And since you left, you've continued to play a significant role in the sector, quite particularly around family violence. So taking on the interim CEO role at DV Vic for 6 months a year ago, and significant ongoing contribution in terms of board roles that you play. So Sandie, thanks for joining us today. Can I ask that everybody turns their video off? Seamus, can you turn your video off, please, so that we've just got the speakers on camera? Thank you. So Maree, Maree is now...
I can't blur my background, I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Blurred background is not the most important thing. Don't worry about it. It's all good. You're incredibly well colour coordinated anyway, so it's nice to see you. Maree is now a consultant, and so Maree brings current professional expertise around mentoring, coaching, leadership training, having had a really significant career in both government and not-for-profit. Most recently as the chief exec of, now the name of the department, I've lost my bit, Maree. Chief exec of community services and deputy secretary at family and community services in the New South Wales government. Prior to that, leadership role in Benevolent Society over 11 years, and similarly oversaw some very significant expansion into other states, growth of services, and has been a really significant leader in New South Wales, but across the country in child and family welfare services as well. So both of you have extensive experience in leadership. And what I was really wanting to kind of have a conversation with the two of you about is around mentoring. Now, the reason we chose this subject is that the topic for today is that it has come up over and over again in the conversations we've been having with the alumni, people, and throughout the Leadership Intensive program. So we thought that we'd kick off our events with having a conversation with two people who have both formal and informal experience throughout your careers of very thoughtfully, I've observed both of you, very thoughtfully putting in effort to bring up and develop leaders around you in your own organisations across the sector, in emerging leaders and building the leadership we need for the social and community services sector. So I'm going to kick off by asking both of you in turn, if you could share an experience that you've had, a story about when you've had personally had a really good experience of a great mentor, and what it was that you got out of that. Sandie, do you want to kick us off?
Okay, I thought Maree might be better because she might have a specific experience. So thanks, Michaela, and good to be here. And I also want to acknowledge that wherever we are sitting today, we are on the land of Aboriginal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I've done a little bit of mentoring myself and been formally mentored a couple of times over my career, but most of my mentoring hasn't been one person, but I've collected people over my career that I trust and that I can learn from. Probably the longest, he wouldn't like me saying this, the oldest now actually. So David Green, who was the Regional Director of Community Services back in 1974. And he was somebody who, and I was a baby social worker out in Broadmeadows, but really enjoyed learning from him. And over the years, I would contact him if I had particular issues that I thought he could help me with. And then I recruited him, well, the board did it, but I did it, to the Berry Street board, where he was on our board for, I think, 12, 13, 14 years. And so just to have somebody who... he's one of a number of people who I've just really enjoyed learning from over many, many years. A couple of others, in particular, Sherry Coote, who was at Kildonan, and Paul Lanossier, some of you might know. And they were both colleagues, and Michaela also, when you were at MacKillop in particular, just really people who I felt were true leaders, and that I could watch them and learn from them and trust them to, if there were issues that I need to talk about, that they would be a great sounding board. But I haven't really had, specific mentoring as such.
Sandie, there's a couple of things I'm going to pick up, I think, Maree, and there's some themes in what you've said in terms of the importance of trust in a mentoring relationship. How do you find those people around you, peer mentoring? So we'll pick some of that up. But Maree, I'm really curious about your experiences of mentoring and what you got out of it.
Yeah. So let me start by way of story. Oh, let me first of all acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land I'm meeting with you all today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Let me begin by story, and this is actually around a person who I had kind of assigned to me as a coach. And one of the things that she really taught me the value of was great questions, and how you can both get used to getting your mentor to ask you some great questions, and you can ask them really good questions. Often in our work in human services, we're either thinking about questions with clients or with, you know, people who report to us, and we're thinking in those terms, and we don't kind of get to put that part of the brain aside and then think about, well, what are good kind of strategic questions or questions that need to be asked of me. And this occasion was the HR manager had said, I think Maree needs a coach. And it was really because myself and the CE at the time were really at loggerheads and things weren't getting better. They were getting worse. And Val, the coach, she and I had nothing in common. She came from the retail industry. She was from a coaching organisation, but she'd offered to do pro bono coaching. And I was quite different for her as well. She didn't understand really human services or whatever, but she knew how to ask great questions. And that's really all she needed to know in that sense. And one day I was going on think about the CEO and how I was right and she was wrong about something in coaching. And Val said, well, what do you want to do here? Do you want to influence her or do you want to fight with her? And it was a really good question for me because
great question.
I had to realise that I did want to fight with her, and my answer was the wrong one, in the sense of I needed to get a bit more mature about the whole thing, and I needed to consciously set aside my desire to show Jane, my CE at the time, that she was wrong and I was right, and instead need to influence her. And it's actually set me on a path in terms of helping other people think through their own kind of influencing strategy. So I would kind of suggest to people, if you are looking for a mentor, then you're kind of opening yourself up to be influenced, and you're opening yourself up to influence others, and that means that you start to walk in their shoes and to think about them. Now, we understand this with our clients. We don't just think that we can tell them what to do and they'll do it. But sometimes in our own leadership journeys or whatever, we don't apply the same kind of influencing strategies or whatever. So I would suggest, if you're looking for mentors, and I've had some great mentors who are either my employers or, like Sandie says, people who you want their opinion on things. You want to know, oh, what would, in Sandie's case, what would David do? Or I had a fantastic different CEO who I still think, oh, I wonder what Richard would think about that. And I use, or we sometimes go, oh, I'm channeling Richard now, because he just had a great approach to things that really helped me. And it kind of met, often sometimes your mentor might temper a part of you that's not as strong as you like, or might be too quick or too slow. And so sometimes when you're looking for a mentor, try and see if they've got something that you haven't got. Not someone that's going to agree with you, but something that's going to help improve your strengths and assets.
I read something the other day, Maree, just one about Sandie, that was about what you admire in other people is untapped strengths in yourself. You know, what you see is the things that you act in somebody else is what you haven't actually yet learned to express. Sandie, sorry.
No, I think that the other issue that Maree obviously highlights is curiosity. So there's no point having a mentor if you're not curious about yourself and the situations you find yourself in, and you want to learn, because curiosity is the basis of learning and self-development.
That point that Maree raised, Sandie, about good questions, and good questions that, because I actually think most of us will have a question, like you said, the things that set you on a journey or really pull you up and go, make you question, think about yourself. Can you think of questions like that you use regularly, Sandie, when you're thinking about people that you're working with, mentoring, leading, or questions that have been asked of you like that?
Again, I don't have specific questions, but I do have events, like seminal things that happened. And one of them was, some of you will know about the organisation called Create, which is a advocacy body for young people in out-of-home care. And quite a long time ago, probably sometime in the, I don't know, anyway, 90s or probably, I think, they had brought people together. They brought Indigenous people, leaders from community service organisations, some public sector people and young people. And then at the end, we all gave a bit of a presentation or a discussion about what we talked about and whatever. And the thing that absolutely just I'll never forget really was the rest of us were quite, particularly the people from the professionals, for want of a better word, were quite pessimistic. It was sort of when Howard was refusing to say sorry, and there were lots and lots of issues. And the most positive people that both the humility and the grace and the resilience were the Indigenous young people who were there. And their ability to transcend what the rest of us were sort of complaining about was really remarkable. And so for me, that made me really sort of start a journey, I guess, about learning really about how do we help support, walk alongside our Aboriginal colleagues in terms of self-determination. And, it's an ongoing journey for me, but it was just really, really, really significant for me.
So I think that idea about moments in time, people that you learn from, and situations, and I think that's a kind of another example of whether mentoring, whether it's formal or informal, whether you call it mentoring or not, the people that you learn from and help you grow and set you on a journey. Sometimes it is a situation rather than a project, something that you do rather than just a question. One of the other things that you talked about, Sandie, was the importance in terms of the relationship that are of value in terms of mentoring for yourself or others is trust. And what are some of the other things? I mean, and Maree, you talked about having a mentor is completely different from you, didn't actually understand your work at all, and the value of that. So what are some of the important elements that you look for in a good mentoring relationship? Maree?
Look, maybe I shouldn't start with this. It doesn't have to be a successful person in your field. I think sometimes we suggest to people, find somebody you really admire and utilise them. And I think you need to kind of suspend that a little bit and find somebody who is curious and prepared to ask you some good questions. And you have to be at the point where you actually want to be asked questions. Otherwise, you'll start to perform for them. That's not useful for anybody. And it won't be as of the same value. So my first thing is, somebody who you are prepared to be open with, and that's so the trust element, and someone you're prepared to be open with questions with. In terms of great questions, I have this question that it's really basic, and I'm always surprised how it works, where you say to somebody who's got a dilemma, and if I was going to give you advice, what do you think I would say? Well, they go on and on with things that you never would say, but they start to give advice to themselves, which is always kind of useful for them to, unpack that. And we don't know why, but talking about things really works, with the evidence is in, if you like. So it has to be somebody that you are prepared to be open with. So not just so that sometimes, not somebody you're in awe of because you won't be able to be open with, and someone whose mind, their approach, you admire. Yeah, you think is going to help you add value. But it's a little bit about you being open to questioning yourself and being questioned, I think, is really critical.
So I would add with that, so it is a bit about knowing what you need when, because sometimes, you know, there are people who are right at one point in your career and not at others. But also I think the other element is somebody who's prepared to give you the time and be responsive, because, you know, it is, and also that sort of reflects back on you as the mentee or the person asking or seeking support. You have to be super organised and prepared to, you know, make the best use of the time. But there'd be no point in having, you know, thinking about a mentor who was too busy to get back to you and you couldn't actually ever get around to seeing them or speaking to them. So, but a bit about knowing, having even if you don't know exactly what you need, having a sense of vaguely what you're looking for, because not all of us know all the time exactly what we need. But so I got a mentor, and I'll talk about Kilfin a bit later, but someone to help me with marketing at one stage, because I knew nothing about marketing and it was an important sort of area to be thinking of. But yeah.
I think that's really important, Sandie, too, that the time and the place and the person and the availability and thinking through all the logistical things of that too. I was just thinking as I was listening to both of you, I have experienced and worked and had a relationship that has been mentoring from and with both of you in over a long period of time now. And I was thinking, Maree, about so my last job before this one, I was in Cambodia and actually very isolated from my networks. And I suddenly realised that I'd lost all of the people that I usually, you know, Sandie would come and catch up with you once a month and talk things through, and informally, and wouldn't necessarily have called it that, but it was incredibly enriching and valuable. And so I reached out to Maree and said, Maree, I need some help. I need some help, and I need kind of to be able to connect and talk. And it was about, you know, Maree, your point about someone that you admire, the way they will think things through and ask questions of you. And I think it's something I admire of both of you, that you are, you will always be honest, and you will always ask the question that is the right kind of question in the moment about that. Frank and fearless advice. While we're on that, I just want to encourage people to put any thoughts or questions into the chat, because I will bring them up straight away. So feel free to add a question in. So we've talked a bit about, how do you find a mentor? I mean, a lot of the reason that a lot of people I've spoken to that are on this meeting or have been part of this group are interested in and struggling and wanting to know how to find. So we've talked a bit about what you go looking for in a mentor. How do you find these people? I'm often amazed. I listen to people who I do admire, or you listen to TED Talks. I remember someone talking, and she went through this string of mentors in her life. And I remember thinking, wow, how did you get all of those incredible people to be supportive of you and interested in your development? Thoughts about that?
There's a great speaker, Herminia Ibarra. She's I think she's at the London Business School or whatever, but Google her, and I'll give her contacts to you, Michaela, at the end. And she talks about networking more than mentoring. But in that context, she says often you need to go to places where you have weak ties, not to the places where you've got really strong ties. So I'm not suggesting that you should only go to where your mentors are in terms of where you've got weak ties, but do think about, am I going to this person because I've got strong ties with them anyway, or am I going to this person because I'm a little bit scared of going to my weak ties? So it's just a way of asking yourself some questions about why you're going to somebody who you're going to. And so one is a little bit about the fear factor. I think it's really important to kind of, feel the fear and do it anyway about asking somebody. there's a kind of thing about, do ask around about somebody before you approach them, though. If you don't know them well, just because they're successful or speak well at a meeting or seem interesting doesn't mean they'll be the right mentor for you. So do, before you approach somebody, because you don't want to end up with a mentor in the end who you don't, you don't have a value mix with, or they don't have the time, and you kind of then find it hard to end the relationship as well. So I would say do a bit of homework, really do that and be clear about what you want. So kind of bit of mind mapping or whatever, and planning around what are your needs. Do you need somebody to be ruthless with you? Do you want someone who you can just call every now and then? What are your needs? So do a quite fearless inventory first before you start to think about, well, who might be able to fill that. First mentor will ask you, though, is, well, why have you chosen? So, what is it that you want to get out of it? So you'll want to put that bit of planning and thought beforehand.
I was going to say similar. Using networks to find people too, that because you may not know the right people yourself, but if you've developed your networks as widely as you can, then you can ask people like, I would have asked Maree or Michaela, look, I'm looking for this. Do you know somebody who's good? I use my board contacts like that at times too. So I think that's really important. Can I just, I'm on the board of Kilfinnan Australia, which is a mentoring organisation that was started in Scotland that actually matches mainly people from the corporate sector, but the public sector and the for-purpose sector with not-for-profit CEOs. So I'm not sure how many CEOs we might have on board, but kilfinnanaustralia.org.au, it's a very good organisation, and they have, they do some terrific matching, finding mentors and matching. And then one of the first questions Maree said, what are you looking for? And one of the things that you would always do if you belong to Kilfinnan is a mentoring agreement, where you both, you set down your goals and how often you're going to meet and all that stuff, which I think is quite useful just to have something in writing. The other thing, I think it's really important that the person seeking the mentoring, like the mentee, does most of the work in terms of, meeting times, organising, being prepared for the meetings, all that stuff, because usually the mentor is often doing it, pro bono. Not always. If they're being paid, then I think they have a bigger, a larger responsibility to actually sort of contribute. But I think the mentees really need to take the lead.
There's a couple of really good comments in the chat. So one of the things I want to say is that what we're going to do is gather resources, and we'll send out a newsletter that is specifically focused on mentoring. So a couple of the resources that most Maree and Sandie have mentioned, a couple of the ones that are in the chat, we'll gather all of those and put them out in the next newsletter, and we'll attach this recording to it. So just wanted to let you know about that. If you've got other resources, then drop them into the chat that you think we can share. Some of the Robin, we'll drop stuff into the chat as well. So Alyssa, if you can just make sure some of the things that have been mentioned. I think it's probably answered. There are a couple of questions about setting boundaries. How do you end a relationship? How do you end a mentoring relationship if you feel like it's not working for you? Who wants to answer that one?
If you do a mentoring agreement, if you have a discussion, and it doesn't have to be formal, you would probably say, how long you expect the relationship or the agreement to sort of go on for and how it might end. And I think it's not a bad idea to have Maree's done this professionally, but like a 12-month agreement, and then if you want to extend it, you can. I've been a mentor through Kilfinnan to a couple of young leaders, and when one of them, we ended it we didn't end badly, but we didn't ever end it. So we just both sort of drifted off, and then me when she wants, and that's fine. We were both happy about that. She's doing very well. The other one, we did come to an end, and that was also quite nice. We're still in touch, but it was a 9-month agreement, and that finished. But yeah, one of them we didn't end up. We had no sort of thank you, goodbye. But it didn't matter. That is, but
ditto with Sandie's comments that it's fine for them to drift apart, if you like, because of other things, life intervening, if you like. But if it isn't fine, then you need to circle back and do some closure.
And I think there's a comment in the chat about ending it honestly and being honest. And I had an experience with someone where I thought, I realised after a little while that she had contacted me and was we were catching up, and she was seeing that as a mentoring relationship, and I hadn't necessarily thought that. I thought it was a peer support thing, but she saw it actually as a much more of a, she was clear, and it was, which was fine. But that point about being honest, having an agreement, being clear about, what your expectations are. I did have a chuckle to myself when I went home one time. I thought, she's doing this because she wants me to be her mentor. And she kind of dropped something like that in the end of the conversation. So, so yes, I think some of those things are really important. Keep the questions coming, and I'll keep feeding them through, and any other comments. But I think one of the things that's interesting about what is in terms of what you're both talking about is the difference between a very formal mentoring relationship where you have a written agreement, a time frame on it, who's in which role, and the more informal peer mentoring kind of relationship. What are your thoughts about that? Because they can both be very valuable, and you often have a kind of a mix of both of those. Maree, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think of peer colleagues, if you like. Sandie's a great example for me. When I was at Benevolent Society and we were thinking about entering into out-of-home care, and the person I really wanted to get on the phone to was Sandie, because I knew she'd be honest. I did. I think I rang her a couple of times. She was very incredibly generous, but very clear. So no, blah blah blah. She had very clear things. So in that case, it was a real kind of collegial peer relationship. But I did feel that I was learning absolutely from her. So. I know that you've got some questions about boundaries there, and I'm not sure about whether you'd call that in that instance a mentoring relationship, because it did feel like it was a peer collegial relationship, but which isn't to say that I wasn't, that Sandie wasn't the one with the information, the knowledge, the wisdom that I was really learning from her. But that can take place, those kinds of things can take place outside a mentoring relationship. What do you think, Sam?
No, definitely, Maree, and vice versa in terms of my learning from both of you over many years. I think one of the things that I've always thought is really important is building your network. So even though everybody's really busy, and with COVID now, it's probably not much time to be talking about this, but if you do get an opportunity to be part of something outside of your organisation, well, both inside your organisation, if they're big enough, well, it doesn't really matter how big they are, I guess, and then outside through peak bodies, working groups or DHHS or something, the opportunities to build those networks I think is really important. But then I guess also in terms of, so therefore you're getting to sort of build in a community of people who you can turn to when you need to. But I was very fortunate with the executive team that we had a very strict. So very much a distributed sort of style of leadership, where there were people, you're probably in the top 20, not top 20, but the 20 most senior people in the organisation. Each of them had specific areas of expertise that I knew that I could tap into if I needed to. And so that was a real privilege, but it meant that I continued to learn. So if I had a problem that we were trying, like a really tricky sort of problem that we're trying to think more creatively, I'd go to one person. If it was somebody, if it was more about, I think we're not quite doing the Aboriginal self-determination properly here, how do we, so I would talk to Margaret Julian. And it just really actually being conscious of what people have to offer, individuals have to offer, and tapping into that in whatever workplace you're involved in. And that's I was incredibly fortunate to work with Jackie, who was my EA for 26 years. And she was so good in terms of the advice if there was a tricky IR issue, because she would be saying, well, is that fair? Her benchmark would be what's fair. And, when you're wrestling with a whole lot of things and balancing them up, sort of having people around you who can focus on specific things that help you with decision making, I think was really invaluable, which is what I loved about working in this sector.
I think that circles back to that question about going to people who will ask you the questions that you need. And Maree, back to your example of what advice they'd give, not necessarily the people who will give you the advice that you want to hear. It's always interesting who you go to ask for advice about, whether it's the person you think will just give you the answer that you've already got. What do you get out of being a mentor? Maree, what are you enjoying about being a consultant and being a mentor now?
Yeah, look, I really find it so rewarding to watch people work hard, I've got to say. I'm always amazed at how hard people work on problem solving, whatever the problem might be, and thinking through and then following through. They work, and that's incredibly satisfying. So you're kind of along the journey, you're not rowing the boat, but you're at the end of the boat, if you like, helping steer, I think. And being part of that is incredibly rewarding. It's like, working with clients. It's like got that same sense to it of watching people and feeling part of helping people think through some things. It does mean, I suppose I'm saying, it's not an easy ride in that sense. So don't necessarily start looking for a mentor because you think it'll be good for your career, or you want to be around somebody who's got a great network. So if you think you'll be mentored by them, then you'll have a great network, because it won't be very satisfying for you, I don't think. You need to be up for the challenge to in your mentoring relationship, I think.
What about you, Sandie?
Yeah, I think probably not the formal mentor. I haven't done a lot of formal mentoring, but one of the things that often people come to mentoring when they're questioning where they are in terms of their career. So it may be a specific problem, they're having trouble with their board, or they don't, they need to improve the fundraising or something like that. But often I think it's more about they're not sure where they're at in terms of their career, and are they in the right role, and also then do they need to be thinking about a move or something else. And so one of the things that has been satisfying is helping people think that through, really, and just helping them, not listening while they decide whether they should just stay where they are even though they're unhappy, or stay where they are because they're enjoying it, or move to a different area. And the other thing that I really enjoy is connecting people. So connecting being able to connect people to other people who can help them, or just be a resource, or might know something or know someone. I really like connecting.
You're very good at it, Sandie. I don't think I know anyone else who regularly drops into my life and says, let's have lunch with such and such. You'd like this person. How are we going to do that now? That's a really, like, that's seriously, how do you do some of those things in this environment? You can't, one of the things that I'm kind of, you know, really noticing is that whole lot of things that could be incidental. Oh, I'm going to talk to Sandie about that because I'm going to be at a meeting with her so we can chat afterwards, you know, that you can't do now. So it's like you have to schedule everything, because I would quite often go to a meeting fully intending that there are about 3 people in the meeting that I wanted to have a 2-minute conversation with. So tricky. So how do we do some of those things now?
Look,
Bit off topic.
You've got to get on the blower. You have to call people and have that used to it. So 2 things. One is I run a peer mentoring networking group that I have done for the last 3 years, and it's a set people. My motivation around that was that when I was in government, it struck me that kind of middle and upper management of NGOs were incredibly isolated from each other sometimes, and had thin pickings in some things for their own development outside their organisation. So inside their organisation, probably, you know, often organisations very strong, but outside their organisations didn't. And so, you know, out of home care with, you know, housing, with early childhood, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I really say to them is we come together and we're all in a group. I have to say, since we do it online, it is actually working very well, but they have fairly strong relationships with each other prior to that. But they need a structure, just as you're providing a structure for this. The second thing is really encouraging them to ring each other and not feel like they need a huge reason to ring each other, but just to say, oh, I might, you know, do you mind if I give you a call about that? And in whatever that is, that they then put a bit of, you know, social kind of niceties around that, so that they can be, you know, let their guard down a little bit and be a bit more open with each other about things, and how they're finding things. I have to say, I think really we need to do that with COVID, because managers and team leaders, they are so busy. They're like constantly in meetings like this. And the idea of them just being able to ring a colleague in another organisation and go, oh, how's your team going? Would probably be really helpful for them to be able to do it. So it does mean you've got to be the sort of person that people want to ring, and you've got to have the courage to phone as well.
What does that mean? How do you be the sort of person someone wants to ring?
Well, I had colleagues in the sector when I was in NGOs who, the thought of ringing them, I just think, oh God, I think I'll ring so-and-so instead, you know, like.
Why? What was it? What was the difference?
Oh, they wouldn't listen. Yeah. You wouldn't trust that they would, you know, be able to have a dialogue with you.
They wouldn't get back to you.
Wouldn't get back to you.
They wouldn't keep it confidential, what you're talking about. I think that issue around trust that you can have a conversation with someone, it won't spill out, but listening, confidential, you can have a dialogue, they call you back. All of these things are kind of, you know, really important.
Like the social niceties in some ways, but they really matter. And you only need that to happen once or twice with somebody that you think, well, I'm not going to call them again, you know. That, you know, it because it does matter.
What do you think, Sandie?
I just think that's one of the advantages of getting involved in networks, because you see how people behave in and it is different now. Everybody's Zooming or Teaming, but you can sort of start to judge the people that you would like to sort of follow up with by the way they behave in meetings. And I would never, there are people who would go to meetings and have never read their papers and then want to hog the floor. Well, they're not the sort of people that I would have bothered to follow up with, really. Yeah.
Okay, so keep firing the questions up, people, if there's things that you're thinking about, because I keep coming up with questions as, okay, so I'm going to go with that next one. So how do introverts take the first step?
Well, this is a kind of feel the fear and do it anyway, isn't it? I think people could say, look, I'm a little bit nervous about this, or I'm a bit shy, or I'm a quieter person, but I was wondering blah, blah, blah. And you can kind of signal that. Quieter and more introverted people are also more interesting. Us extroverts, everyone knows what you think because you're always telling the world what you think. But the quieter people often have a lot to, they're a bit more intriguing. So there's some real strengths there that make you more interesting to.
I think the other thing
that's also mentors are interested in people.
Yeah, and there's also the if you know someone who can connect you to the person, so it's sort of the first time you get together, it's not you're not total strangers and you've had that sort of breaking the ice opportunity to talk about it with somebody else. But it also depends, I guess, if you want it enough. If you really want to do it, and as Maree said, feel the fear but do it anyway. What is it? Fake it till you make it? Is that the,
Yes.
So a bad experience. We've been talking about all the valuable things about mentoring and when it's fantastic. Talk about an experience when it wasn't helpful or it was tricky and difficult, and not difficult in a good way, but when actually it was a problem with either a mentor that you've had, someone you've mentored. Got a story?
I've just got a brief one, and it wasn't dreadful. It was a young woman who, she was just going on maternity leave, and it was a little bit, as Sandie described, she was kind of working out, well, what will I do when I come back? Will I keep with this profession? Will I keep with this organisation? And so she was like not really clear about how she'd manage it, what she was after, because she was going through such a searching time. And really, I didn't have the time, and I should have said to her, I don't know that you're quite clear on what you want out of this, and I don't know that I can spend the time with you trying to help you work that out, because I'm a bit time limited as well. And so I always felt terrible about it because I didn't spend the time helping her work out what she wanted to do. So sometimes when you've got she had a lot of balls in the air and a lot of things that she was thinking through. And I could have, in hindsight, I could have said, why don't you spend a bit of time writing this down or doing this or doing that? But she was, in a different space in her life.
I haven't had any negative experiences, partly because I think, the first part of when you're establishing the relationship, before you're really both committed, you just get I always had a good sense of whether this will be, a useful thing to do or not, hopefully for the mentee. And so it hasn't been an issue for me. Maybe because of the preparation, I'm not sure.
I think there's probably a couple of things that I would observe about that, Sandie. Your point about who does the heavy lifting, which is a bit what you're talking about, Maree, being very clear about who does the heavy lifting and who does the work, and being honest. My observation, Sandie, would be that you wouldn't have had those because you'd be very honest and you'd just call it as you saw it. would be my bet. There's a question that I'm going to read out. And how do you deal with cultural barriers, stereotypes, presumptions that people might have, for example, around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander identity, cold, LGBTI? How do you deal with, and what are your thoughts about dealing with those different cultural aspects in a mentoring relationship?
Well, one of the young woman that I was mentoring was a CFO and from an Indian cultural background. It'd be interesting to ask her, because from my point of view, I was, just curious about her experience and what her cultural background meant in terms of her work and her career opportunities and what she experienced in the workplace. So I didn't see any issues from my perspective, and I don't think she did from hers, to be honest. But again, it's, I guess, because I was curious and just wanted to sort of be as helpful as I could to her at that, while we were meeting. But maybe I was naive, but I don't think so. I think it was fine.
It's a great question, because it really points to assumptions on either side, like decide actually ask questions on both parts, both the mentee just asking questions of the mentor and the mentor not making assumptions about because this person's Aboriginal or because this person's young or because this person's older but just come into the industry or whatever it is, in terms of background. That just set the assumptions aside, suspend and ask questions.
I think the thing that I would add to that, having spent 3 years working in an organisation with people with very different cultures, is what I learnt was that to be very careful about not making assumptions about that people would understand what you is the communication thing. That people would interpret what you were saying in very different ways. And so there was also a need to check. That thing about when you're interpreting something into another language, get somebody else to interpret it back, to do the double interpret back. Doing that double check all the time. Not all the time, but about important things. How did you understand what it was that I said? Because sometimes, I worked out that I might talk to my team. We had 9 different cultures in the team. I would say something, and I realised after a little while it was heard and understood in very different ways, depending on the context which people were coming to that from. Yeah. So another question, difference, how do you understand and explain the difference between mentoring and coaching? You said that was going to come up, Maree.
Yeah. Look,
Maree,
they are
this one.
They are different, but they're not, there's elements of both. And what they have in common is great questions and curiosity about helping somebody. Coaching's just often, particularly executive coaching, it's got a lot more boundaries to it probably than mentoring, in terms of absolute focus on the person being coached. And generally you'll have your coaching contract, you'll know exactly what the goals are, a bit more goal oriented probably than mentoring. But the processes are sometimes quite similar, but the structures around them, if you like, the context around them are generally quite different. Yeah.
Maree, does coaching, so my sense is mentoring is often about you as a person, your development and career and aspirations and obviously performance, but is coaching more about your performance, not you as a person? Not necessarily.
Yes, no. Not necessarily. Yeah. Particularly if people might often be getting, executive coaching around their performance and have their goals, but the life coaching, if you like, may well be about the kind of whole person.
So there's a comment in the chat about very reinforcing what you're saying, Maree. Coaching is short-term, targeted. Mentoring is longer-term, often career-driven. So it's the boundaries. Boundaries are different. The contract is different and looser, different in it. What are you two curious to ask each other? You know, in terms of thinking about so that back to the good questions thing. You know, I mean, what's a because we might finish up soon. I think part of the reason we had this. So any last questions? I'm going to ask a few more questions and get Maree and Sandie to think about a question to ask each other about mentoring. Pop your questions in the chat because we'll finish up soon. The plan with these sessions is to keep them to an hour over lunch. We made it a bit longer this time just to make sure we had dealt with all the technical difficulties, which we had. So, Maree, what's a question in terms of what's a question you've got in terms of mentoring and thinking about this for each other? Sandie?
Oh, bloody hell. Sorry, Michaela.
Yeah, Michaela's guys.
We're going to have to put this out with warnings on it now.
Yes. I think the question that I always like to hear from people is, what are wrong?
Can you repeat that?
So, what have you learned from when things have gone wrong? Because generally in our lives, there's a few generative themes that we're like, oh, I'm learning that bloody lesson again, you know. And I'm always curious about that with people, particularly people like you, Sandie, who are very successful and very thoughtful and very kind of brave and honest. Yeah, so what have you learned when things have gone wrong?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. I think I'll do one of these every day for lunch. It's been so lovely to actually talk with
Happy
you both.
to.
I think it's when I haven't done the right thing. So, and hopefully that hasn't been very many times, but there have been a couple where I was overly influenced or knew at the back of my mind what was right, and for whatever reason I didn't do it, and which is why I learned to actually, you know, seek advice from those around me, but also sometimes just sleeping on things, you know. So take, you know, if you've got a really tricky thing to deal with, just letting everything permeate in your brain. Yeah, so probably when you've got that feeling that doesn't feel right, but you still do it, I think is probably, so listen to that feeling. But it's also something I think you develop with experience as well. And if I had to ask Maree a question, it's really, really difficult. I suppose what would be the one thing that you have learned about your experience? What's the most important thing you've learned into your experience as a mentor?
I've learned to be quiet more and to listen more, just like not even to ask questions, just to sit with silence much more. That's generally hard for me to do, but when I've done it, I thought, damn it, that's a good thing to do, just to allow a lot more, let silence do the heavy lifting, if you like, and let the spaces in the conversation sit there. And yeah, that's what I've learned.
Can I just add, Michaela, with that, because that's a really lovely thing that I've also learned. But the other sort of sort of related to that is the creating space for others. You know, as a leader, when you it's not quite the same, but when you don't lead, when you actually step back and you create space for others to lead, and I think that's been really important too.
So the last comment in the chat is thank you for your honesty to Sandie, but I want to say thank you to both of you for your honesty. That's partly why I asked both of you to do this, because I knew you would not be able to resist yourself in sharing. Is there any last comment or advice or tip before we finish up? There's been a wealth of things in that, so happy if there isn't.
Or maybe when somebody asked a question about what do you do if you're introverted or whatever, and my sense would be do take the time and, you know, give it a go. If you want support or to be mentored, then, you know, take the next step.
Sandie?
I'll leave that with Maree and you, Michaela.
Okay, so lots and lots of thank yous, brilliant session. Thank you both for and I want to finish up by thanking you both. I just want to share with everybody, neither Maree or Sandie hesitated when I rang and asked, other than Sandie saying, no, I don't do that. And I said, Sandie, my experience is that you have been I've observed you doing it for many years for many people very generously. So both of you have, both today and I know for a very long time, been generous with the people around you, generous with your time and thoughtfulness. Sandie's point about connecting people, sharing the resources that you have and ideas. Maree, one of my first memories of you was you sprouting off things about books that you'd read, that I'm furiously writing down things that you were sharing ideas. So you're both very generous with your time, your wisdom and your ideas. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
Pleasure.
And all the best to your colleagues who tuned in.
So can I ask, Sandie, go.
Michaela, sorry. Can I just thank everybody for just the work you're doing? I mean, you probably are going to do that, Michaela, but it's just a really, really, really tough time, particularly in the family violence space, but everywhere. So thank you for today, but more importantly, thank you all for the work you do every day. It's bloody fantastic given the pressures you're all under.
Thanks, Sandie. Beautifully said. I also want to thank my team because there was a bit of anxiety and build up. My team did this. This is in the COVID environment. This is not something any of them knew how to do beforehand. It's not my no comms expertise. It's just the team stepping in and helping. So Alyssa, Jess, Shani, do you want to turn your cameras on for a minute? I just want to acknowledge and thank you. I think Shani had to leave actually, but Alyssa and Jess, thank you very much for the work that you put into doing this. And Lee is another member of my team. So, and Zoe, upcoming leader, who's been listening in on all of these conversations. Who said that you're not going to get a whole lot of fabulous things out of homeschooling? She's learning and listening and making comments on our meetings. The girls' chats we have. Thank you, everybody. We'll send out a whole lot of stuff with this recording. So thanks for being here today.